Miss Ricky knew something was off the moment she stepped into the classroom. Her students were already seated. Early, quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the low buzz of the environmental controls and the soft clink of cantina stirrers. Ramira and Tinley exchanged a glance but said nothing, both focused on their drinks. No one was chirping, no teasing, no whispered side conversations about her morning outfit or the inevitable saucy human facts someone was surely hoping to pry out of her. That's when her fronds lifted slightly, an unconscious reaction to stress. They were planning something. She narrowed her eyes, scanned the room, and sighed. If this is about trying to trap me into another lecture on that part of human biology, let me save you the trouble. I have notes prepared and I won't be flustered this time. A few students chuckled, but not the loud, giddy kind, more the kind of restrained smirks that suggested they knew something she didn't. Still, she turned to her teaching pad and began syncing up the holo display. The lesson for today was standard enough. Comparative limb strength in sapient species, using human athletics as a frame of reference. She tapped her claw against the command panel. The first image blinked into place. Human runners, muscles coiled and defined, captured mid-sprint. So far, so good. She tapped again. Volleyball, team dynamics, competitive agility. Next slide. Her hand froze. The breath left her lungs so fast it was like being struck in the chest. The classroom hadn't reacted yet. There was maybe a half-second of delay before they caught up to what they were seeing. It was her. And Caden. The image was crisp. Too crisp. Captured from their private quarters. Morning light spilled across their bed. Caden was half draped over her, his face tucked against her neck, her claws resting lightly on his back. Her fronds were lowered, relaxed. Her eyes were closed. Their bodies were tangled beneath the blanket, and while they were both clothed, the image reeked of intimacy. The class exploded. Not with laughter yet, not even with words, just noise, choked gasps, a few nervous squeals, a flurry of whispers and elbow jabs. Tinley dropped her cantina cup. Ramira's yellow ears twitched violently. One of the PO tried to mute their own screen by smacking the side of their helmet. Miss Ricky spun on her heel so fast her sweater fluttered. Who? The single word cracked like a whip. No one answered. Not directly. Ural students all suddenly found their notes fascinating. One of the djinns subtly powered off her tablet. A young male opticon was shaking his head in disbelief, eyes locked on the display. She stormed back to her desk and shut the screen off with a hard jab of her thumb. The silence afterward was thick and uncomfortable. Miss Ricky's scaled shoulders rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. You know what this is, don't you? Her voice was calm. Too calm. This isn't just a violation of privacy. It's federal misconduct. You accessed a private feed from a Star Confederation officer's residence. A few students shrank in their seats. I don't know who did it, Tinley said suddenly. Her voice was higher pitched than usual. But I saw someone messing with the slide queue yesterday. I thought they were just... I didn't think they'd... She stopped. Wisely. Miss Ricky closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Her fronds pulled tight to her skull. That was always a bad sign. Class is dismissed, she said, cold and sharp. You will each submit a 3-page report on Ethics in Cross-Species Education by tomorrow. Single-spaced, no AI assistance. And before you get clever, I will be scanning for structural patterns. You try to cheat, I will find out. There was a beat of hesitation, then chaos. Chairs scraped back, tail ends twitched, feathers ruffled. Students poured out, muttering apologies and swearing to each other they didn't know. Miss Ricky didn't move until the last of them had cleared the room. Only then did she let out a long, slow breath and lean both hands on her desk. It had finally happened. She'd known this job came with risk. That teaching about humans, living with a human, loving one, put her under a microscope. But this wasn't curiosity. This was intrusion, a calculated one. And the worst part? She knew exactly what moment they'd captured. That soft, vulnerable morning. Caden, half asleep, murmuring something about my little dragon queen, holding her like he never wanted to let go. They'd stolen that from her. Miss Ricky grabbed her thermal canister and took a long pull of now lukewarm coffee. Her tail flicked once, then again. The slide didn't just cross a line, it broke something, and someone in that classroom was going to pay for it. But not today. Today, she had to report the breach, start the disciplinary file, and figure out how to finish this course without completely losing control of the room. Tomorrow, though, the lesson would hurt. The door hissed shut behind the last of her students, and Miss Ricky stood still in the center of her classroom, the lingering heat of embarrassment buzzing under her scales. The display screen had gone black, but the image still burned in her mind. Caden's face buried against her neck, her clawed hand curled against his bare shoulder. She could feel it all. Phantom warmth, the weight of his arm around her ribs, the low hum of his morning voice calling her his dragon queen. She exhaled, long and slow, then made her way to her desk, flipping the chair backward before dropping into it with a graceless thud. Her claws raked down her face. Her fronds twitched at odd intervals, stiff with agitation. This wasn't part of the curriculum. Not this. Not being exposed like that. She reached for her canister, the same thick, heat-retaining kind that Caden always teased her about, and took a long, bitter sip. The coffee inside had gone past hot and into burnt, but it grounded her. Roasted beans, astringent finish, chemical clarity. Zra blood didn't dance to caffeine like a human's did, but it still gave her a mental edge, and right now she needed it. Miss Ricky wasn't sure how long she sat there, one ankle hooked over her knee, eyes unfocused. She let the classroom settle. The hum of the lights overhead, the faint rattle of a chair someone didn't push in properly, and the distant echo of hallway noise outside the door. All of it normal, all of it achingly mundane in contrast to what had just happened. She tapped her pad and locked down the classroom systems, initiating a full scan of recent uploads. She'd track the source of the tampered slide, and when she found the student responsible, she'd be filing a formal infraction report with the Confederation's Education Board. But part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know who did it. She could guess. She'd seen enough sideways glances in that room to narrow it down to 3 suspects. Smart, tech-savvy, curious, reckless. She took another sip. It was the trust that stung, not just that someone had accessed her private data, though that was violation enough. but that it had been done for spectacle. They hadn't been trying to understand. They weren't asking out of wonder or respect. It was for the thrill of seeing something they shouldn't, for poking at the mystery of the human's raw bond just to watch her flinch. The image hadn't even been obscene. No nudity, no kissing, nothing that would technically break any regulations. But it was real, intimate in a way that words couldn't replicate. And the moment it hit the screen, the class hadn't reacted with laughter. They'd reacted with silence, because they knew they were seeing something true. That kind of truth scared people, and maybe that was part of it. Maybe that was what none of them could admit aloud, that humans didn't just confuse them biologically. They disarmed them emotionally, and that was far more dangerous. Miss Ricky shifted in her seat, letting her tail curl over one leg. Her claws tapped against the side of the canister in rhythm with her thoughts. She remembered when she first met Caden. Loud, warm, clumsy. In every way that the Zra were reserved and guarded, he was open and chaotic. At first, she thought he was posturing, like some of the younger human men did. But he never stopped. He just was. He meant everything. He said what he felt. He asked the questions others were too polite to voice, and he touched her like it wasn't just allowed, but expected. He burned with that ridiculous, steady heat humans had, not just physically, but emotionally. He didn't flinch from her claws or her tail. He never stared too long at her fronds when they flared in anger. He laughed when she growled. He listened when she hissed. He kissed her fingers and never once flinched at her scales. She closed her eyes. The coffee warmed her from the inside, not enough to erase the sting, but enough to keep her steady. They hadn't just exposed her relationship. They'd exposed something deeper. The vulnerability of choosing to love someone outside your species. The unspoken message she sent every time she showed up in class after crawling out of his bed. That she was willing to be seen, willing to navigate the complications, willing to be known. She wasn't ashamed. She refused to be. Let them whisper. Let them theorize. Let them write her up on anonymous message boards. But if they thought they could rattle her, they'd forgotten what species she belonged to. She stood, smoothing the front of her sweater. Her claws tapped the tabletop once, sharp and final. Then she collected her notes, tapped the edge of her teaching pad to save her edits, and gathered her canister. She still had a day to finish. And tonight, she'd be crawling right back into that warm, tangled bed. She'd tell Caden about the slide, and he'd blink once, laugh, and say something infuriatingly calm like, "Well, at least they caught my good side." And she'd growl at him, and he'd nuzzle into her fronds and tell her she was beautiful when she was angry. The thought made her snort under her breath. She pushed open the classroom door and stepped out, the last remnants of burnt coffee swirling behind her. Let them stare. She had nothing left to hide. The classroom was still dim when Tinley came back. The ambient lights hadn't fully reset yet, so the long room was cast in a soft lavender glow. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and the ozone tang of high-resolution projection tech. Tinley stood just inside the doorway, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her oversized sweater, feathers tucked flat against her body in an effort to seem smaller, quieter. Miss Ricky didn't look up at first. She sat at her desk with her mug in hand, the rim resting against her lower lip, claws drumming against the ceramic like a metronome marking time between breaths. Her fronds didn't rise, didn't flare. She just waited. "I figured you'd still be here," Tinley said softly. Miss Ricky gave a non-committal hum, eyes still on her mug. "You figured right." There was a long pause, and then Tinley took a step forward. Her shoes squeaked against the smooth flooring. "I didn't do it," she blurted. That got a glance. A slow, sideways one, measured, unreadable. "But I saw it get added to the slide queue," Tinley continued, feathers starting to rise with agitation. "I was here yesterday after hours, just grabbing my data pad, but someone, one of the Gen, I think, was messing with the control hub. I thought it was a prank, not something serious. Not like that." Ricky exhaled through her nose. A tired sound, not angry, not resigned, just worn thin at the edges. "I know," she said finally. "It doesn't matter." Tinley blinked, taken aback. "It does, though." "No," Ricky said, her voice low, calm. "Because even if you'd shouted about it yesterday, even if you'd tackled them to the floor, it still would have happened eventually. Maybe not that image, maybe not today, but it's only ever a matter of time before curiosity turns into a weapon." Tinley stood frozen, mouth parted like she wanted to argue, but Miss Ricky just took another slow sip of her coffee and gestured to the empty chair in front of the desk. "Sit." She did. Awkward, hunched, like she expected to be reprimanded or dismissed. But Miss Ricky didn't lecture. She just sat there, cradling the warmth of her mug, eyes half-lidded. "It's real, isn't it?" Tinley asked after a moment. "With him?" Miss Ricky didn't answer right away. She stared at the last dregs of her drink, the dark swirl of liquid, the fine grit at the bottom. Then she set the mug down carefully and folded her hands on the desk. "Yes," she said, "it's real." Tinley swallowed hard. "What does it feel like?" Miss Ricky tilted her head slightly. "You want the poetic version or the truth?" "The truth." "It feels like having your DNA rewritten by a wildfire," she said flatly. "It feels like waking up every morning with your blood on fire and your heart screaming for one more minute next to them. It feels terrifying, exhilarating, and sometimes like you're standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing holding you but their voice." Tinley blinked. The rawness of it was unexpected. Honest. Stark. "But why?" she whispered. "Why let yourself fall into that, knowing what it does to you, what it costs?" Miss Ricky was silent for a long time. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice low but steady. "Because humans don't just love with their hearts, they love with their whole being. Their touch, their smell, their breath. You don't get a part of them. You get the entire storm." Her claws curled slightly on the desk. "They feel everything. And when they love you, you feel it too. You feel it so deeply that no war, no distance, no regulation, no species barrier means a damn thing. You stop caring about what's safe. You care about what's real." Tinley blinked rapidly, suddenly very aware of the tightness in her throat. "I think I'm in love with one," she said before she could stop herself. "A human. She works in medical. She gave me hot tea once and rubbed my hand because I said I was cold, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since, and I thought maybe it was just the pheromones, but it's not. Miss Ricky gave the smallest smile. It wasn't smug. It was something more like recognition. That's how it starts, she murmured, with a hand, with warmth. Then you're caught. I'm scared, Tyne-Lay admitted. Good, Miss Ricky said simply. You should be. They sat in silence for a while after that. No judgment, just the quiet rhythm of understanding, thick in the air between them. Miss Ricky slid the coffee canister across the desk, and Tyne-Lay poured what little was left into her own cup. It tasted awful, but she drank it anyway. I'm going to issue a formal report, Miss Ricky said after a moment, voice cool again. But I'm not going to name names. Whoever did it knows what they did. That image wasn't just a breach of privacy. It was a glimpse into something sacred, and it showed more about humanity than they probably meant to. Tyne-Lay looked up. What do you mean? They saw us together, Miss Ricky said, and they felt something they didn't understand. It scared them, made them curious. So they tried to break it. But they couldn't, because that wasn't just a picture. She tapped her claw against the desk once, final and firm. That was love. Real, flawed, hot-blooded, cross-species, against the rules love. And it's not going anywhere. Tyne-Lay looked down into her half-empty cup and nodded slowly. When she stood to leave, she paused just before the door. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Miss Ricky didn't hesitate. Only that I didn't let it happen sooner. Tyne-Lay left without another word, the door hissing shut behind her. Miss Ricky stayed behind in the glow of the lavender lights, staring at the bottom of her mug, letting the silence stretch. Outside, the station rotated gently, carrying her further into the void of space. But in her quarters there was warmth, a blanket, a man who always ran hot and smiled like trouble in the morning, and a fresh pot of coffee waiting. She stood. Time to go home.